Did you know that since the year 1900, even if you only count professional academic editions, a new translation of Beowulf has been released once every 2 years? There's a lot of them. And a lot of people lately have been asking me to kind of make a video going over the best translations out there and which one I recommend, give kind of my verdict on it. I think this is a really important topic, and I also think there's a really obvious answer. So today I'm going to go over 5 recent translations, and then at the end, give my verdict for which one is the best. If you don't want to wait that long, there's going to be timestamps in the description, just skip to the last one. I'm only going to cover translations today that I consider worth mentioning. That is, there are literally hundreds of translations out there of varying quality. Chances are, if I don't mention a translation, it's because it's either too outdated, that is, scholarship has kind of eclipsed the edition of the Old English text that the translation uses, or, in my opinion, it's just not quite on the level of publicity as the ones that I'm going to be talking about today. Full disclosure, I do not consider Tolkien's translation to really be in the running here, for loads of reasons. We have almost 100 years of scholarship on Beowulf to improve our understanding of the poem in between now and when Tolkien wrote his translation, which really does not reflect him as the scholar that he grew to be in the decades after writing it. And there are just better options out there. If you want to learn more about this, my colleague Gavin has a whole video on it that he recently made, which I'll have linked in the description. Anyway, let's talk Beowulf translations. Heaney, 1999. So, I will be completely frank, I do not recommend Heaney's translation of Beowulf at all. It's not because it's an unfaithful translation, although at times it is. And it's not because it's a boring read, because it's definitely not. I find it quite beautiful. Take, for example, this passage from the voyage of the yachts to Denmark, describing their wood-wreathed ship. Over the waves, with the wind behind her and foam at her neck, she flew like a bird, until her curved prow had covered the distance, and on the following day, at the due hours those seafarers sighted land. Sunlit cliffs, sheer crags, and looming headlands, the landfall they sought. It was the end of their voyage, and the yachts vaulted over the side out onto the sand and moored their ship. There was a clash of mail and a thresh of gear. They thanked God for that easy crossing on a calm sea. The problem with this translation isn't that it's bad, it's that this poem cannot really be called a translation of Beowulf. It's something new, and that something new is essentially Heaney telling his own version of Beowulf, which is a good read, but if you want a translation that really gives you a sense as to why this is a great poem, one of the best ever written, you're not going to find that here. A lot has been said on this, so much that the poem is sometimes derogatorily called Heaney Wolf. I won't add fuel to the fire. My friend Colin Gorey wrote a pretty good article on this, which I'll have linked in the description if you want to read more. Fulk, 2010. Robert Dennis Fulk is a legend. I've said this before, I really don't think it's an exaggeration. He is probably one of the greatest scholars of all time. And as an editor of the 4th edition of Kleber's Beowulf, he spent a lot of time with the poem, so naturally his translation is pretty good. I would say that at the time of release, it was the best translation out there, and remained so for a while, as evidenced by the fact that it's usually what you'll find cited in academic papers over the last decade. All this to say, brace yourself for the problem I have with this edition to be pretty nitpicky. And that is that, on the whole, Old English texts published in the Dumbarton Oaks Facing Page translation series, which, don't get me wrong, are consistently excellent, don't have textual diacritics, which are these little dots and lines over the Old English text. As a beginner, these markings are absolutely crucial for understanding pronunciation. They were for me as a learner, and they still are for me as a teacher. So I'm always going to be in favor of an edition that has them over one that doesn't. Fulk can be excused for this because he spent so much time and effort on the diacritics in the Kleber 4, which are excellent. But the problem is that now you have to buy 2 expensive books instead of 1 if you want the best of both worlds. Ergo, Fulk's might as well not be considered a facing page translation, which, considering its high quality, is pretty disappointing. Liuzza's 2nd edition, 2012. Here's another good edition that's been really popular and helpful for students for a long time. It's clear Liuzza did his research, his translation is entertaining, and while he doesn't include all diacritics, he does mark vowel length, which I think is an improvement from Fulk's edition. If I wasn't making a video in this style, I would find no need to go looking for cracks in this excellent translation. But the cracks are there, and every once in a while I do find a sort of head-scratching decision in translation. I'll give you one example. In the second line for Theod Kuninga, Liuzza gives Fulk kings. Now, prima facie, this looks like a pretty good translation. Theod means folk, and Kuning means king. The problem is that this isn't Theod, meaning folk from older Theodo. It's a separate compound constituent, Theod from older Theudias, which in compounds like these really comes to mean great. We see this in Old Norse Thjolv as well. The word then doesn't mean folk kings, it means the great kings, to distinguish from petty lords. So accordingly, Fulk gives high kings here, which I think is more accurate. The Old English text of Liuzza's second edition is also pretty outdated and has some questionable editorial decisions. Take, for example, lines 18a and 53b, which read Beowulf was Breme and Beowulf Schuldinga, respectively, in the manuscript. Now, Liuzza does admit in a footnote that many scholars agree that the original name was Beo. But this makes it sound like the matter is up for debate, when in reality it has to be Beo. Old English meter allows for a certain set of patterns. If you'd like a full explanation on what these are, I recommend that you check out Geoffrey Russum's new book, Syntax of Beowulf. The link to that will be in the description. But in the interest of time, I'll give you the quickest possible crash course. Beowulf was Breme scans like this. Beowulf Schuldinga scans like this. Now, we can have lines that look like these. We can have lines that look like these. But these are outlawed types, meaning that the Beowulf poet follows a series of rules pretty strictly throughout the poem, and these both break those rules. This one is an outlawed type that Russum calls H5. This one is an outlawed type that Russum calls H2. Now, if we were to amend the names to take off the Ulf and just have Beo, Beo was Breme, now that's a really classic common A1 type, and Beo Schuldinga, that's a really classic common D2 type. So these are two of the most common half-lines that the poet uses. So, simple logic tells us that the scribe probably just saw Beo in the exemplar manuscript, thought, Beo? They told me this was about a guy named Beowulf. This has to be a mistake. I'm just going to fix it. And he changed it to Beowulf, therefore breaking the meter and obscuring the poet's original reference to the mythological figure Beo, whom we know to be the son of Scyld from the Chronicles. So there really isn't much up for debate here, and it's unclear why Liuzza would leave this reading in his second edition, published 4 years after the Kleber 4, which has the correct reading. For reasons like this, while it is an objectively good translation, I wouldn't recommend Liuzza's edition over my favorite, which I'll discuss last. Headley 2020. Now, I'm going to say something in defense of this book. I think it actually gets a bad rap. Most people who are interested in Beowulf as a serious poem don't really read past the first word, which she translates as bro ! But as a read, it's really fun and engaging. Take, for example, the speech of the border guard to Beowulf and his companions when they arrive. How dare you come to Denmark costumed for war? Chainmail and swords, there's a dress code. You're denied. I'm the Dane's doorman. This is my lord's door. Who are you that you dare steer your ship for our shore? I'm the watcher of these waters, have been for years, and it's my duty to scan the sea for shield-bearing dangers to Danes. I've never seen any force come so confidently over swells, certain of welcome, no welcome won. Did you send word? No. Were you invited? No. You're not on the guest list. And also, who's the giant? What weapons does he hold? Oh, hell no. He's no small-time horse soldier, but noble. Look at his armor. I'm done here. Spies, state your secrets or be denounced. Who are you? What's your business? Where'd you come from? I'll ask one more time. You're not coming past this cliff. Answer now or bounce. You men, who, where, why? I think this is a really creative and entertaining work, and I've always enjoyed reading it. The problem is that, much more so than in the case of Heaney's translation, this is simply not Beowulf. As skillful as Headley's poetry is, and I really think it is, the decisions she makes have essentially no grounding in the actual voice of the original Beowulf poet. They're entirely her own voice and her own creation. At times, the choices she makes in translation are completely mystifying and really don't have any relationship with the poem she's translating. And that's fine. The book is a genuine contribution to my library, But we should call it what it is. It's not Beowulf, it's an original poem, and therefore I can't recommend it as a Beowulf translation. Shippey Neidorf, 2024. I won't beat around the bush. This is my favorite translation by far, and I'll tell you why. For starters, the pedigree is outstanding. Tom Shippey is probably most widely known for being a great Tolkien scholar, but he's also one of the greatest philologists ever, and both he and Neidorf have spent a significant portion of their lives reading, studying, and writing about Beowulf. With Professor Fulk excluded, you would really be hard-pressed to find two living people more qualified to talk about and translate this poem. And, unsurprisingly, the quality of translation does not disappoint. Anyone who has listened to Shippey talk or read his papers knows that he's a really extremely entertaining and artistically minded person, and his style of prose is provoking and engaging. I'll give you one passage I particularly like. The Danish king Hrothgar is giving a speech directed at Beowulf, praising him, thanking him for his service, and giving him sage advice for life. Towards the end, he warns about greed, and then he says this: "My dear Beowulf, best of men, shield yourself from such deadly danger. Choose the better part, famous champion, counsels of eternity. Take no heed of pride. Your strength is famous now for a while. Soon sickness or the blade will steal your strength, or the grip of fire, or the surge of flood, or bite of sword, or flight of spear, or terrible old age, or the light of your eyes will fail and grow dark. Warrior, death will suddenly be too strong for you." Can you feel the artistic awareness of a scholar who has spent his whole life studying Beowulf and J.R.R. Tolkien? I really love Shippey's approach to poetic compounds. The Old English poets clearly use these formulaic expressions in sort of vague senses, which are too often given literal translations, which can actually sometimes lead to inaccuracies. Take, for example, line 935b. The poet describes Heorot as having been heurudreuri, which literally means sword bloody. Fulk translates it as sword gory. The problem is, the reader might ask, gory from what swords? Grendel doesn't fight with a sword. How can the hall be sword gory? This same word appears in multiple occasions where the perpetrator of said violence wasn't using a sword, like the dragon, for example. And upon consideration of these passages, it really becomes apparent that the poet didn't mean the phrase to be interpreted literally at all. It just means the aftermath of a fight. Shippey, accordingly, gives stained with the marks of battle, which I like a lot better. It's a truer translation of what the poet was trying to convey. On the whole, it's pretty obvious that Shippey just gets Old English. I'll give you another example. The very last word of the poem, Lofjornost, is the final word in a series of elegiac descriptors that the poet gives his hero in death. That is, he was monna mildust, the gentlest of men. He was monthlarust, the kindest. He was laudum lidost, the most loving to his people. And then Lofjornost, which the dictionary translates as desirous of praise, and Liuzza accordingly translates this as eager for fame. If you think that one sticks out a bit, you're not alone, and here I think it's actually just a mistranslation based on an overly literal dictionary definition of loaf, which most plainly means praise. The problem is that it has a really broad meaning and generally actually refers vaguely to the sort of reciprocal relationship between the lord getting praise from their subordinates and the subordinates receiving generosity from their lord. That's what Beowulf was eager for, not bland fame, which is consistently treated warily by Old English poets and thinkers. Accordingly, Shippey translates this word as most generous, which makes so much more sense. Lastly, it's really important to mention that the actual Old English text given in the facing page translation is currently the highest quality edition available, full stop. And this is where a lot of Neidorf's contributions can really be felt, as well as his commentary at the end, which consistently serves to kind of give you up-to-date scholarly insights on what's going on in the poem. The text generally follows that of the Kleber IV, with a few key improvements based on the decade plus of scholarship since the Kleber IV was published in 2009. One of these is line 1537a. In the middle of Beowulf's fight with Grendel's mother, The manuscript, Kleber 4 and Liuzza all read, Je fang thabe Axley, nalas for fachtemaaren. That is, Beowulf grabbed Grendel's mother by the shoulder and sort of wasn't upset by the conflict. Liuzza translates this as, Beowulf grabbed by the shoulder Grendel's mother. He had no regret for that feud. There are two things that are weird about this line. For starters, in Old English meter, inflected verbs like ran, jumps, grabbed receive lower stress than nouns like shoulder. And in every half line, the highest stressed position is supposed to alliterate. But in this instance, it doesn't. We have F alliteration, but it's on the wrong word, yfang. The other strange thing is this question. Why does the poet feel the need to tell us that Beowulf wasn't upset about the facht? They're fighting. What would he have to be upset about? The solution to both of these problems is that the scribe simply left a letter out. Beowulf doesn't grab Grendel's mother by the axle. It was by the faxle, the hair. Not only does this instantly fix the F alliteration problem, it also makes so much more sense. Grabbing a woman by the hair is very, very rude. Beowulf, however, is at the utmost end of need, and so he doesn't spill very many tears over committing what is otherwise a very obvious social faux pas. So, call it gallows humor. While there are many good Beowulf translations out there, for its faithfulness, for its wit, for its artistic quality, and for the most scholarly, up-to-date edition of the Old English text available and the commentary, I recommend Shippey and Neidorf's 2024 edition 10 times out of 10. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you disagree. If you liked this video and want to see more content like this, check out the rest of the channel. Kindly consider subscribing or becoming a supporter on Patreon. And until next time, Farathye Yasunde.